We are thankful you are here. We are thankful we serve a great God who is worthy of our praise. We'd like to invite you to stand with us. If you're able to stand with us as we sing unto the Lord.
Ladies' movie night is coming up Tuesday, January 29th, 6:30 at Pam's house. If you have any questions, you can either talk to Pam or you can talk to Pastor Emma. They'll get you squared away with all the details. On Wednesdays, for the next 7 weeks, it started this past Wednesday, but for the next 7 weeks, our church is hosting tips classes. And basically, it is for foster parents specifically, but everybody's welcome. Chris and Janice were there. And they're focusing on trauma-informed parenting. How to parent children that have experienced deep trauma in their lives. things that we cannot understand unless we really press in and talk about some of the difficult issues. And so what a great opportunity to just be able to meet some folks from our community. And we have a couple ways that you can serve and partner with us as we do that, either helping out with childcare or helping out with a meal. Mary Miller did a fantastic job this last week and homemade some wonderful lasagnas and fed us until we couldn't possibly eat anymore. And part of that was because we planned for way more people than we're actually but she did a fantastic job, and she took some home, yeah. And so, but we're going to be doing that in the weeks ahead. The good news is we've already got the menu planned for you and your shopping list. So all you've got to do is say, I'm willing to help, and we'll get you plugged in, yeah.
Just as a plug for this,
Yeah.
The things that we were taught, they help you with yourself, not just
They
kids.
really do.
So
They
if
really
you
do.
have any interest at all
Yeah.
in learning more about how to deal with trauma.
Yeah, one of the things that they were kind of talking about is that many of us have been through some deep trauma that we've never dealt with. And so, really, really good. There's not enough time this morning to talk about it all, but you're absolutely right. Just really good. So if you're interested in helping out or attending the class, it's free on Wednesday nights. Talk to me after the service, and we'll just a quick plug here and encouragement. I want to again just say that it is a blessing and a privilege to pastor a group of giving people. How you give week in and week out of your finances. And as far as really kind of coming up to the end of our church calendar year and our faith promise that we did a year ago. If you'll remember, Dr. Reeder came. It was Dr. Reeder this last year. Yeah, Dr. Reeder came. My years are running together. But he challenged us to dig deep and to give sacrificially. That's really what Faith Promise is all about. Right? Not just giving 10%, right? But giving of ourselves sacrificially. All that we have belongs to Him. And when we embody that, I think probably our checkbook is often the very last thing that we like to surrender, right? Because it's hard sometimes. But we together came up with a goal of $23,000, nearly $24,000 to give towards Faith Promise. And Faith Promise, basically, all of those funds go towards supporting missions in particular, and even more focused, it goes towards supporting our World Evangelism Fund. All of our missionaries that are all over the world are supported through World Evangelism Fund. And so we want to meet that goal. And we just have a few more weeks left, maybe 2 or 3 more weeks before we're kind of at the end. And we're like $7,000 away. The good news this morning is that all of that money is already right here. We've got the money. God's got that money. We just have to be faithful in listening to Him and how we're going to help meet that goal. In the time that I've been here, I will speak to that because that's what I know. We have never not met our goal, I don't think. We have never not met our goal. And so what that says to me is that you trust Him. And so I just want to encourage you and say thank you. And I also want to encourage you and say, pray about what the Lord will have you do over these next few weeks. $7,000 is nothing to God, right? That is nothing to God. We can do that. And so let's just pray about that and how we can finish this year strong. We are part of the #1 missions giving district in all of the Church of the Nazarene. We give more to missions than any other district. And guys, we give more as a church than any other church on our district. So that means we're #1, guys, as far as the percentage goes. And That isn't to say that it does, but look at how God is using us, and that we get to partner with people all around the world. So let me just challenge you with that. I know Tina and I are talking and praying about what we're going to do extra and on top of what we're already doing, so I just encourage you to do the same. And so with that being said, I'd like to ask if our ushers would come and receive this morning's tithes and offerings as we continue in worship.
Psalm 150 says, "Praise God in his sanctuary. Praise him in his mighty heavens. Praise him for his acts of power. Praise him for his surpassing grace and for his surpassing greatness." We've come together today to worship and praise the name of the Lord. Amen. And we are inviting you to join us as we sing songs unto the Lord. And I just want to invite you to consider also how your chair is facing this morning. We are intentionally around tables, but we are also intentionally gathered as one. So make yourself comfortable and join us as we sing praises unto the God who is worthy of our praise. Stand with us.
remember together Lynn's stepmother, excuse me. I keep wanting to say mother-in-law, stepmother, who had some surgery just a few days ago and is not doing very well. She's in ICU. The doctors are hopeful, but she's got a long ways to go, and so we want to just remember them as they're already carrying the burden of Lynn's mom and her diagnosis with cancer. She was actually in the hospital just this last week as well, and so let's just ask the Lord for healing touch and for just continued support and comfort in this time. That would be a good thing. So we're praying for Marilyn, but we're also praying for Sally and for the rest of the family. So just share at your tables if you want, if you will. Prayer requests, praises. Take a few moments to pray together, and we'll just spend a little time with Him. Call us back together this morning, finish up as we're at our locations there. We'll have an opportunity at the end of the service to also do some more sharing and some talking about the things that we've learned and talked about over these past few weeks. And so we're in this series called Time. And before we kind of move ahead, I just want to do a little recap on where we've been the past few weeks. Week 1, we talked about in Romans 13, the Apostle Paul reminds us that the time of Jesus is nearer today than it was yesterday, right? And there are two things that we know about Jesus' return. There's two things that we know. That Jesus is coming back, right? We know that. You believe that? Okay. The other thing that we absolutely know is that we don't know when He's going to return. That is the other thing that we absolutely know, that we don't know when He's going to return. So those two things we can take to the bank. And that's important that we acknowledge that, because it should create in us a sense of urgency that Jesus is coming back and we don't know when, so we need to be ready. Right? Amen. And so there's this hope that we have of Jesus returning, and it should change how we live in this moment. Week 2 in 1 Kings, we looked at the passing of the baton from Elijah to Elisha. Remember, Elisha was out in the field plowing with his teams of oxen, and when Elijah chose Elisha, he told him to go think good and hard about what it was that he's asking him to do. He said, make sure that you count the cost. Because what I'm asking you to do is not just some simple, like, hey, go shut the door and then the task will be done, right? It's not that simple. It's a complete change in direction of life, right? Sometimes God does that in our lives. He says, look, you're doing this, and this isn't necessarily wrong or bad, but I have something different for you. Are you willing to lay everything down and follow me? And so we kind of learned through Elisha that he kind of took drastic action, right? What did he do?
About faith.
Yes! He slaughtered his oxen and he burned his plow to cook the oxen and said, hey, let's have a party because I'm getting ready to leave and do what the Lord wants. That is drastic action. Like that is all in solid commitment, right? And so sometimes that's what the Lord calls of us, right? Is this drastic action. There is no turning back from this now. I guess he could have bought more oxen and another plow, but that's too hard, right? All in. But then we learned about Elisha that he kind of lived with this steady progression as he served Elijah. We're not really told a whole lot of details about what Elisha did for Elijah, except hey, pour water on my hands so that they can be clean, right? That seems like a boring way to spend 13 years or 18 years, right? But sometimes God asks of us mundane things and faithfulness in those things, and we'll leave the miracles up to Him, right? And so day by day, it would be years before Elisha would take over. And so he just stuck with it day by day. Last week we talked about the truth that every journey, no matter the length, starts with a single step. Right? Starts with a single step. And I think that's really important. Israel was getting ready to enter into the promised land. Right? A time that would have been anticipated for generations. God promised this place that would be theirs. And so there would be an excitement, but they also looked at this promised land and saw all of these great nations with great warriors and great kings that they would have to defeat. And basically, the Lord said to them, look, you're going to move into this land like I promised, but you're going to have to trust me that it's going to be done little by little, and I will take care of your enemies. Because they weren't ready, even though the Lord was leading them they weren't ready to inherit the promised land completely. They didn't have enough people to inherit all the land, right? They couldn't care for what they were about to inherit. And I think that that's important because once we take something on, once it's ours, we have to keep it up, right? Once you go to the car dealership and you sign the paperwork and you make the down payment, you have to keep up with the payments if you want that car to be yours, right? The same thing with a house. Once you sign those 453 pages that they make you sign to buy a house, right? That's your house. You're going to keep up with it. Or you're not, and it's not going to be yours anymore. So there's this truth that they weren't quite ready to inherit all of it, but they were taking the first step into the kingdom. And God says, will you trust me day by day? I'm going to go ahead of you and put fear into your enemies so that they will be defeated. But you have to trust me day by day. It couldn't happen overnight. And there's something beautiful in that. That it's not in our strength, but in His strength that we will take on the things that He calls us to. So, I asked you the question, where would you like to be in 5 years? And I know that there's so many variables to that. Maybe you're just like, I can't even think about next week, let alone 5 years. But I think that there's some value to looking forward. I shared last week that I had the opportunity of being a part of the Board of Ministry interviews for candidates for ordination, right? And so I got to interview these people, actually all of the people in my group. This was their very first ordination interview. It was their very first district license interview. And so I think about what I went through and that process of the Lord calling me into full-time ministry. I had to look ahead to what my future was going to be. Obviously not knowing and understanding all the different variables, but I had to say yes and realize that at some point I was going to be in full-time ministry. This is what God asked me to do. Hey, I want you to go to school. I want you to get your degree. I want you to go through the course of study and get district license. I want you to be ordained, right? So there's this end result that is coming, that I'm ordained. Right? But then it's this day-by-day process. And that was a drudge sometimes, day by day, being in this ordination process every year, going to interview and make sure that I have studied well and that I have the gifts and graces to be able to be a pastor, right? So maybe we are tempted to say, I can't think about next week, let alone 5 years from now. But let me just challenge you with that a little bit. God, what do you have for me in the years ahead? Is there something big that you want me to do that I'm going to have to trust you day by day to help get me there? Because maybe He does. Maybe you're saying, I'm too old for that. Let me just say, you're not too old for that, right? Abraham and Sarah were too old to have children, and yet they had children, and that's where we get the nation of Israel. So if you think you're done having kids, well, I'm not saying that God's telling you that, but my point is this. God, where do you want me? Where do you want me to be? How can I be closer to my wife, to my husband, right? How can I be closer to you? How can I be a better influence at my job? How can I do better with my finances? Whatever it looks like, God, what are you asking of me? Where do you want me to be? And if it's this big, then just trust that day by day He will get you there, right? Small steps matter to God. Faithfulness over and over and over again. Zechariah 4:10 we looked at just briefly last week. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. Do not despise these small beginnings. Sometimes if we're not making this great impact, we feel like we're not making an impact at all, and yet somehow there is something beautiful about taking a small step closer to Him. Don't despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. And so, with that being said, I just felt led to bring some encouragement to us this morning. What I hope will be just some practical things to help us change how we think. Because sometimes the first step is that we just have to ask God, would you just change how I view this, right? Something as simple as that. Now, I know that it's not always easy because we like the way that we think. And that can be like pulling teeth. But Romans 12, right, really speaks to that. Don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but be transformed. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think, by renewing your mind, right? And so sometimes we think a certain way, and that way that we think has been influenced too much by the world, and we need to have God readjust where our focus is. Sometimes that's the first step for us. Because when that happens, what does it tell us at the end of 12:2? Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I don't know about you, but I want to know what God's will is for this afternoon. I want to know what His will is for next week. I want to know what His will is for my life. But I have, 5 years, 10 years from now. But I have to daily ask Him to change the way that I think. So, with that truth in mind, just turn with me to Genesis 1. We're just going to turn to Genesis 1 for a moment. In the beginning, God, that passage. So it says this, Genesis 1 through 5. It says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening and there was morning on the first day. Now, I don't want us to get caught up in a discussion about a literal 7-day creation or thousands of years. I don't want us to get necessarily caught up in that. But this concept of a day, I think, is important to our conversation on forward movement, on upward movement towards Him, right? Because it's about taking small steps. I was thinking about this, and it was reinforced this morning as I was talking to Mary. So John does lessons here every week, and it's interesting to listen to his students. A tendency for every student learning an instrument, and I'll speak to the drums especially because that's what I know, is to play things as fast as you possibly can right away. So if this is the tempo of the song, right? This is the tempo of the song, but it's kind of complicated, right? You might need to start practicing the different parts of that song at this tempo until you become more comfortable with it, and then you add tempo, then you speed it up a little bit. But a natural tendency for almost everyone, Eli included, because I heard it, right, is to speed up and get right to where you want to be right now, and what ends up happening? What happens? You mess up. You have to stop, and then you have to start again, and you're going to start slow again, and then gradually you're going to speed up. One of the best things that you can do, in case you ever want to pick up playing the drums, is go and buy a metronome and put it in your ear and play something simple to a metronome so that you can keep time. That's your tip for the day, okay? All right? That's your tip for the day, right? But that's how we do it. We like to be at the end result because it feels good to be there. Look at what I accomplished, but that's not how it works. The people that are the best at what they do have spent years, hours, bloody fingers and knuckles and whatever it is, sprained ankles and feet and doing like gymnastics and, you know, all of these things. The best people at what they do have spent years getting there. So why would we think that our lives, that our relationship with God would be any different? Right? Moment by moment, day by day. Day by day. The last few words of this passage are what I really kind of want to focus on this morning as we seek to find the time, as we seek to make the time to do the things that God has asked us to do. There are many times throughout the whole Bible, in fact, 40 times plus, in which morning and evening are mentioned in the same passage, right? Evening and morning. Evening and morning. And I've read Genesis 1, I don't know, 1,000 times, but this week, it really stood out to me that the order in which those were said is kind of important. There was evening and there was morning the first day. Why would you start with the end of the day? Right? Like why wouldn't you say there was morning and there was evening? That's kind of how our minds think. We think about first and second when we're talking about something. So the very first time that a day is mentioned in the Bible, it's presented to us as evening and morning. And that's different from how we think about a day. We look at a day as maybe like, let's just say 7 o'clock a.m. I know some of you get up at 4:30 and whatever, but you're crazy. But let's just say 7 o'clock a.m., 24 hours to 7 o'clock a.m. That's you know, a day. But midnight is actually when a new day starts, but we don't call it morning, we call that midnight because we've only been asleep for 3 hours at that point. And it's kind of confusing. And so we get up, and the very first thing that we do in the day, I don't know, maybe we eat breakfast or whatever, but we spend the good portion, coffee, maybe it's coffee, that's fair. Maybe it's an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Right? But like, we start our day and use up a good portion of our day. If we think about a day how we normally do, right? In the morning when we wake up till we spend a good portion of our day doing stuff that we have little to no control over, right? There are just responsibilities that we have to care for our family, so we have to work. At some point, you have to do the laundry. Now, you don't have to, I guess, but you're not going to have any friends, right? You have to cook, you have to clean your house, you have to take the car in to get the oil changed, you have to call the plumber out, and right, you hope that it's during that period of time, otherwise they'll charge you double, right? There are things, there's this period of the day, during the daytime, 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., that we have less control over, right? Because it's filled with responsibilities. And so I want us to start thinking about our day, how they present it here. There was evening and there was morning. Jews often look at the start of their day as evening. Sundown to sundown is a day, right? So if you begin looking at your day, how the Jews looked at their days, then what you're doing is you're starting with a part of the day that you might have a little bit more control over. Does that make sense? I get that there's unforeseen circumstances and we don't really have as much control as we think we do, right? I get that. But there are kind of two parts of the day. 9 hours that we don't have as much control over, and then 14 hours, 15 hours that we have more control over. And so what if, in order to get things done that were really important, in order to get things done that God is calling us to, we start thinking about our days differently, and we start our day with the things that are important for us, because that's how God created us, and used it as a preparation for the work that we have to do, right? I don't know about you, but my tendency is to think about Sunday as the end of the week. I tend to think that way, right? And we've talked about that a little bit before. It's Monday through Sunday, right? And so and maybe that's just because of the rhythm that I'm in as a pastor. It takes intentionality to kind of get out of that. But some of us, we just can't wait till Sunday because of the hard week that we've had. But what if we shift our thinking and say, I can't wait for Sunday because in this fellowship, in this prayer time around our tables, through hearing God's Word, this time is going to prepare me for the week ahead. Right? It's about how we prioritize our time. So rather than saying, my day starts at 7 a.m. and the first thing that I do is grab a muffin and a coffee on the way to work, and I go and spend 8 or 9 or 10 exhausting hours at work, and then I come home and whatever I have left in me, my wife and my family get. Right? That's messed up. Whatever I have left in me, God gets. Right? I mean, this is a change in how we think. I mean, we know that the sun rises and the sun sets, and that isn't going to change, right? So there's still 24 hours in a day. But how we think about that and how we set aside time, and I think that that's key. How we set aside time. I just don't know where I'm going to find the time to do it. Look, if it's important, you will set aside time. You will. I mean, proof is in the fact that if some tragedy happens, none of us have time for a tragedy, but when it happens, you set aside time to devote to that tragedy. You just do. You change. You do what you thought was impossible. My day is just so full, I just don't know if I can find time to do it. But you find time, you make time for the things that are important. And sometimes we have to intentionally shift how we think so that we can do the things that are of greatest importance, that will rejuvenate us, that will give us what we need. I just have a couple of practical things for us. And then we're going to spend some time talking around our tables about these kinds of things, because I think it's important to kind of unpack and process. One of the most spiritual things I think we can do is sleep. I'm serious.
Works for me.
You chuckle because it is funny, because it's so countercultural. It is so countercultural. One of the most spiritual things. Hey, look, I expected a whole lot more amens out of that one, because I know some of you, and I know what your sleep pattern, right? Like, one of the most spiritual things that we were created that way. God rested. God took a break. Now, we can talk about Sabbath, and we need to take a Sabbath day. For me, my Sabbath is Friday. That is my day that I don't let anything interrupt whether it be family time or things that I need to take care of for my home, things that are, this is me time, right? This is my time to just take a break. We need Sabbath. You need Sabbath. I don't have time for Sabbath. Listen, you don't have time not to Sabbath. You will be healthier if you rest, if you break. And so, breaking that down onto a smaller, more manageable kind of bite-sized piece, right? We're talking about day by day, moment by moment. Sleep at night. Go to sleep. Put your phone down, set it aside, go to sleep. Stop thinking about what you need to do tomorrow. Sleep. Sleep. In like the late 1800s, the average adult, I don't know where they got this statistic, but it's there somewhere, right? Was 10 hours a night. That was the average. Was 10 hours a night. Why was that? Because when the sun went down, you couldn't do anything, right? You could light a candle, but there's only so much you can do by candlelight. So we had this rhythm of when the sun went down, you're finishing up dinner, and maybe you sit around the campfire and play your harmonica for a minute, and you tell the story about the rattlesnake that almost bit your brother's cousin's uncle's father, right? And then you go to bed. You go to sleep. That's what you do. And then something happened. Electricity came around and the light bulb, right? And that just messed everything up. Oh, hey, I can just flip a switch and stay up. I can work 24 hours a day. Woo! That feels so good. And so we have gotten to the point that our average hours of sleep per night for adults is like 6 hours and 15 minutes. That is a huge difference, guys. They're 3.5. So, Big J is sick this morning, and so Tina decided not to come. She made that decision last night, and she reminded me as I was laying down to bed. She said, "Hey, you can set your alarm for an extra half hour later." And guys, I don't know if you feel this way, but an extra half hour is like gold, right? That is like, we need sleep. We feel better when we sleep. Now, I think we can oversleep. And if that's your tendency, maybe I'll just bring it up and let the Holy Spirit do work. Don't just lay in bed all day. That isn't what I'm advocating for, right? Because you'll never get anything done. But take care of yourself. Right? I think that God advocates for that. God advocates for self-care. Right? One of the things that the church board does a good job at, one of the things I think that our district does a good job at, is for pastors making sure to really hold us accountable to self-care. Because it is very easy in a job like mine, in a vocation like mine, where I'm in ministry all the time, really kind of on call 24/7. You never know when you're going to get a phone call of, hey, somebody ended up in the hospital. It's like, okay, well, hang tight, I'll be there in the morning. No, you go, right? And so there's these rhythms of ministry, and it's easy to not take time for self-care. But we have to. We have to. And that applies whether you're in full-time ministry or you're an electrician, or you're retired, because it seems to me that most retired people get more busy when they retire. It seems that way. That seems to be take a break, right? Get some rest, and see if we begin thinking about. So I love in Genesis 3, I believe it is. It talks about how Adam walked with God in the cool of the evening. Think about that for just a moment. In relationship to our time. Many of the rabbis in Jesus' day, their study time was at night. That was the time that they devoted to study. It was in the evening. It was kind of at the beginning of their day, right? So let's shift our mind and think about starting our 24-hour day at 5:30 at night and saying, you know what, I'm going to eat a nice dinner, I'm going to be with my family, I'm going to spend time with the Lord, I'm going to sleep so that when I get up tomorrow, I've got enough strength to finish out my day. Right? I mean, maybe it's ridiculous and you're saying, oh, well, you're just talking about words, but what if we really thought that way, though? What if we put our priorities in order and said, my day starts at 5:30, whatever that ends up looking like? The second thing that I just want to point out to us is that after we get some sleep, right? So get some sleep. My points this morning rhyme. The second one is go deep. Go deep. What do I mean by this? I think that there's a few ways that we need to talk about going deep in our lives, spiritually and physically, relationally and creatively. Spiritually, our spiritual lives need to be number one. Again, Genesis 3, talking about how Adam walked with God in the cool of the evening. What a beautiful picture that is. We need to take the time, we need to make the time intentionally to give God moments in our day. And I think that that looks different for all of us, but what if we start our day with Him and we end our day with Him, and everything in between is woven with moments, these special moments. That's what it is to pray continually, right? To be in that relationship with Him. Physically, we need to spend some time taking care of our physical selves, even if it's just, look, if your tendency is couch potato, walk for 10 minutes.
I'd love to.
Spend some time exercising. Doing something physical, right? Physically, because when we do that, we feel better. We find that we have more energy even though we're exerting more energy. Relationally, spend time with your family. Spend time enjoying one another and building relationship. Making time for friendships, not just surface relationships, but deep and meaningful, supportive relationships that you can go to and share your joys and share your difficult burdens that you have to carry. And go deep creatively. I think this is one of the areas that we neglect the most. One of the attributes of God that we neglect the most is creativity. The very first thing that we learn about the character of God in the Bible is what? That He's creative. And so we can't stand in the presence of God. We can't live in a relationship with God and not acknowledge that creativity that He has, but how He has passed that along to us. And so getting creative in how we do work, getting creative in life. It's fun to create a new relationship, build a new relationship. One of the things that I'm enjoying, because I need a hobby, is building something, right? I'm not very good at it, but I like to start something and finish something. I like to create something. It's healthy for us to create and to use this God-given attribute that God has passed that down to us. And so, as we kind of spend a few minutes wrapping up at our tables, I just want to pull in some thoughts from these past couple weeks. Talking in your tables about some of these questions. What drastic action do you need to take to make a change in your life? Is there something that God is calling you to, or that you've always thought that you wanted to do, that is going to require a drastic action? A kill the oxen, burn the plows, and cook the oxen and eat them. Kind of that's what I'm talking about, right? Is there a small step in the right direction that you can take today, right? Maybe it isn't about drastic action, but maybe it's about one small step, going from nothing to something, right? The third question, what ways might you need to press in and live in slow, steady progression? So maybe God isn't calling you to something new, but maybe He's saying, I want you to continue doing what I've been asking you to do. And sometimes we need strength for that, because we can get bored. The fourth thing is, we all have to make time for what is important. So what things might you be able to cut out? What things might you be able to adjust in order to make time for things that are of true importance, that will help not only get you through your day, but help you to get where God wants you. Okay? So those are kind of the 4 discussion questions. If you go off from that, that's okay. But spend a few moments talking about that with your table groups, and then we'll wrap up here in just a few minutes.
Because
All right, I'd like to kind of call us back to.
We're just getting started.
If I could, we're going to kind of transition here into a time of continued fellowship. I hope you continued your conversations over some good food. But I was overhearing another conversation, and I just wanted to wrap up with this. A few years back, I had heard well, I guess a couple months back, somebody was talking about how we get so comfortable in our discomfort. Chris, I was listening.
Well, I listened to you first, so it's okay.
Yeah,
Because actually you're repeating yourself.
Yeah, so this is Pastor Ben quoting somebody else who I forget who it is, right? But this is a little tidbit of wisdom, and I think that it speaks to us looking ahead and looking at where God might want to take us, whether it's tomorrow or next week or in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years, right? We get so comfortable in our discomfort that we never move forward. Even if we're not at a place that we'd like to be, at least it's what I know, and it's kind of comfortable here, right? I mean, you may need to think about that over this next week, and maybe your tendency is to not agree with me, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with everything I say. Human life, I think will probably prove that point to you. I think we see it, and so I just look forward to what the Lord will do in us and wants to do in us as we press into Him and as we say yes. And I think that requires surrender, right? Romans 12:1 and 2, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Because God will begin to change the way that you think, and the way that you think will begin to, as it changes, will begin to influence how you live and the things that you do, the things that you make time for. And God has good things in store for us. I believe that for each and every one of us. They all might look a little bit different, but we have to allow Him to do those things. And so, we're going to take just a few minutes to transition into our time of fellowship over some food. The tables are already set up, but I know our volunteers will help get the food put out, and we'll call you back for a time of prayer, a blessing over the food, and a time of fellowship in about 5 minutes.